Hello everyone! So today I'm just going to cover some basics of the visual system and its related disorders that people often get stuck on when I teach this class in person. So the first thing we're going to cover is the 5 categories of vision. People again get kind of stuck on this sometimes. So the first one is vision for action. And this is visual processing that's required to direct specific movements. And so it includes things like reaching, ducking, catching, things along those lines. It's in the parietal visual areas of the dorsal stream. And this gives just an example of that. So you would have to reach for this cup and your vision helps you direct to where it is, right? So if I am trying to grab something on my desk and I don't look, I might miss it. But if I look at it, I can pick up my sample bottle pretty easily. So next you have action for vision, and this is where you search for only one part of the target object and you attend to it selectively. So you do some visual scanning, you figure out what is actually relevant to you, and you focus on that. So it uses a lot of eye movements and selective attention here as well. And in particular, we as humans tend to look at faces because that's relevant to us. And in particular, when we look at a face, we focus on the eyes and the mouth because those are going to allow us to connect to the person and understand what they are saying. So here are some examples of what this might look like for a normal subject and for someone who has agnosia, which we're going to talk about in a couple slides. So what this is from is eye tracking. So when they do eye tracking studies, they either attach something to you or oftentimes now it just is almost like a little speaker bar that they have on, and it actually detects your eyes and where they travel on the screen or whatever else you're looking at. So you can see here that for the normal subject, you've got looking at the whole face, but really focusing in on where the eyes and the mouth are. And then for the agnosic subject at the bottom, someone with agnosia, you'll see they're not doing as well. They're not honing in on those eyes and the mouth. They kind of like don't know where to look. Then you also have visual recognition. So this is in the temporal lobe, and this is really about object recognition. This is really important. This brings together our memory, essentially, with our visual system. And this becomes really important for, again, things like faces, to try to remember someone you've met before. If you've ever had that sort of awkward, where do I know you from? That's your visual recognition system trying to kick in, right? Objects, places that we know, those are also important. And then also visual space. This tells you about your spatial location. It could be looking at an object relative to a person. This is called egocentric space, and this is going to be tied to that vision for action system that we talked about. Or it can be looking at objects as they relate to each other. And this is allocentric space, and that's the visual recognition system kicking in. And then there's visual attention. So we have selective attention for specific aspects of visual input. We get a lot of visual input all at once, right? And so we have to be able to focus in on what's most important, or we would just get overwhelmed, right? So you're seeing my very messy office behind me, right? But you're able to hone in on my face or even just on the PowerPoint, right, as you watch me because of your ability to engage your visual attention. So we have mechanisms for helping guiding movements in the parietal lobes, and then in the temporal lobes, there are mechanisms for object recognition. So again, that's going to tie in as well. So the next thing we're going to talk about are the agnosias, and these are difficulties in vision, and in particular, often with that visual recognition. So the first one that we're going to talk about is apperceptive agnosia. So this is a deficit in the ability to develop a percept of the structure of an object or objects. So you have acuity, you have color, you can sense motion, but you have difficulty sort of recognizing the overall form. It's basically you don't have object recognition. So I could pick up something like this, my tape dispenser, and I would be able to see, like, this is black, it's a thing, but I couldn't tell you what it actually is. This results from bilateral damage to the lateral parts of the occipital lobes, which again, if we remember, way back here, where vision is often centered. So simultechnosia is a common symptom here where you're unable to perceive more than one object at a time. So if I were to hold up the tape dispenser and the Snapple bottle together, right, you could only focus on one of those at a time. And then associative agnosia, you can perceive objects, but you can't identify them. So you could copy a drawing of it or draw it. You know, and again, your drawing ability doesn't have to be great, right? But you can't identify it just looking at it. And this is related to memory problems with objects. So again, that visual memory, being able to tie things to what you already know. And these are often problems in the anterior temporal lobe, so it's not in the visual cortex, it's not in that occipital lobe, it's later things where it connects to memory. Other agnosias, which are really important. So one is prosopagnosia. So this is where you can't recognize faces. And this is obviously really difficult for humans because we just talked about how important faces are to us socially, right? So you can recognize facial features a lot of the times, facial expressions. Most of the time you can tell a human face from a non-human face, but you can't actually connect that face to the person. You can't recognize the person by looking at their face. You would have to use other cues, like someone's hair being curly, like mine. And sometimes they don't recognize their own face and don't accept that fact. That's really difficult for them. And they can recognize facial expressions normally. So this is often from a bilateral injury in the brain. There are some really great videos on your module about this and what it's like, including videos of interviews with the famous Dr. Oliver Sacks, who not only did just wonderful jobs writing up case studies and stories from his practice, but also suffered from prosopagnosia himself. So he talks about his own prosopagnosia on those videos. Yeah, very difficult for a human to deal with. Another one is alexia, and this will sound a little familiar if you're familiar with the term dyslexia. So alexia is the extreme of dyslexia. You just can't read at all. And it's a form of object agnosia. You have the inability to construct perceptual wholes from parts. But it's also a form of associative agnosia, in that word memory is damaged or inaccessible. So you see that there are letters, but you can't see what they are or connect it to your memory to be able to actually read it. And usually this is damage in the left fusiform and lingual areas. And then visual spatial agnosia is a topographical disorientation. So you're unable to find your way around familiar environments, like in your neighborhood or even your house sometimes. You're unable to recognize landmarks. And people who have visual spatial agnosia also often have prosopagnosia. So those often go together. There are other things I want to mention real quick too that I don't have on my slides. You can have auditory agnosia, where you can't recognize sounds even though you can hear them just fine. So very similar to, these visual agnosias we've been talking about, where you see an object just fine, but you can't recognize it. Same thing here. You could have what's called pure word deafness, which is auditory agnosia for speech. So very similar to what we were just talking about with Alexia, essentially. And then auditory sound agnosia, where you can hear just fine, but can't recognize non-speech sounds. There's also tactile agnosias, where you have trouble recognizing things like touch. So those can be difficult as well. All right, hopefully this is helpful in clearing up, again, some of those sticking points that people often have on this chapter.